So, welcome everybody to another Lunch and Learn series from me, John Denton, in my DNA of Business series. My role in life is to work with business owners and help them get their businesses ready for sale and turn their businesses into a saleable asset, because a business that's ready for sale is well worth keeping. And I do that on a group basis with my advanced mentoring groups, some of whom are on the call today on this meeting, and I do it on a one-on-one basis with business owners as well. And these lunch and learns are something that I run that are free and open to anyone who wants to come along. And I, from time to time, get guest presenters to come on and talk about a topic which I believe is important for business owners to know. And today, my speaker, my presenter is friend and associate Matt Hern. Hi, Matt. Welcome.
Hey, John. Hi, team.
So Matt is a budgeting coach. He's also a speaker and an author, and helps reduce, I love this, helps reduce debt, stress less, and save money. So I certainly love the stress less and save money bit, well, and the reduced debt for that matter. And Matt is keen to help business owners because very often business owners, if they're taking drawings or just got a business that's a bit cyclical, they suffer from fluctuating income streams, which can make it pretty difficult to manage personal income and personal finances and things like that. So that's what Matt's going to be talking to us about today. And of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, then a lot of businesses have become more unpredictable as well. When people registered to come onto this web meeting, they optionally could answer the question about whether their income has gone up, gone down, or stayed the same since COVID-19. And all bar one said it had decreased. So that was interesting. There was only one person said that their income had gone up. So Matt, it's now over to you. So I'm going to let you have the floor, and if you do a bit of an intro and go for it.
Thanks, John, and thank you for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to join your Lunch and Learn series. As John introduced there, what drives me and what I'm absolutely passionate about is helping people afford to pursue the life that lights them up. And that's why I love working with small business owners and self-employed people, because one of the reasons I have found that people go self-employed or start a small business with an entrepreneurial idea is because there was something inside of you burning inside of you that made you want to go out and try something different, do something different, make a contribution to the world that you felt called to make in some way that you weren't able to do another way. So I love helping you manage your money such a way that you can continue to pursue that and make the change in the world that you were born to make, perhaps. Yeah, that's my lofty ambition anyway. That's how I see the world. We're all born with that abundant potential for contribution to the world. So that's really what I want to talk to you about today and share with you. And really, actually, I prefer to have a conversation rather than talk at you in many ways. So even though John said, have your questions to the end, I'm actually going to throw to you very, very soon for some questions into the chat box. If you haven't found the chat box, please do go and find it now and get ready. Because I really love to, for everyone who has generously gifted us their time showing up live today, especially, I'd love to serve exactly what's on your mind with money right now as we're at the start of June 2020, with restrictions slowly being released here in WA and around Australia. What serves you right now? And as John introduced, many people have had their income decrease. So let's really laser this conversation on you. What I have found leading up to this is that many people struggle with the variable income, because being self-employed and having the entrepreneurial idea, while you're in that startup and growth phase, the money is up and down like a yo-yo. And your energy is really being put into running the business and getting it off the ground and up to that stable income, mature phase perhaps. So managing your personal finances, well, what time and energy is left over for that? And you weren't taught how to do it anyway. Then as one of my clients, who's just called me before this, he mentioned that one of the reasons that he came to me was because his bookkeeper has for years been making very unflattering comments about the level of his drawings out of the business. So maybe you've experienced the same as well. So what's going on there? So let me pause now for the introduction from that perspective, and I want to throw to you. Hopefully I've given you enough, 60 seconds time to think about what made you sign up and register for today's Lunch and Learn session. What is the most challenging thing about managing your money right now that you would love to hear? I'm happy to really be guided by so many thousands of things that I could share with you. I want to share what matters most to you. So if you could find the chat box and throw into the chat box right now, what would you most like to learn in this next 30 minutes that we've got together in this conversation? So yeah, the cycle, the week to week, and yeah, John's just put in there about how to stick to a budget. So there's so much good stuff to go into there. So what I might do is grab my trusty little whiteboard over here, and let's launch into something. Bring it forward a little bit. So one of the real challenges I think that a lot of people have highlighted is the fact that when you're self-employed, and this has been exacerbated right now through the pandemic and with the economic response of the pandemic, in that sense, is that our income is really variable. It really fluctuates. It goes up and down like an absolute yo-yo. And that's, time down there and dollars there. So hopefully that's coming through all right on the screen there.
We just can't see the timeline, that's all.
Oh, the horizontal axis, you can't see that? Yeah.
Not quite.
Hopefully you can visualize the horizontal.
We know what it is.
I'm a former engineer, John. If I'm not drawing a graph or drawing a spreadsheet, it just doesn't feel right in some ways. Yeah, so for the podcast listeners, there's a horizontal timeline axis and the vertical axis is dollars. And what I've drawn is basically a big zigzag. Think of Harry Potter's lightning bolt extended in one sense there. So that's what our income is going up and down like a yo-yo. And that's in good times. In bad, that's just self-employment, it would seem, from most people that I've talked to. So, how do we manage that in that sense? So uncertainty about the forecast of that is certainly one of the real challenges. And I guess that's unknowable. So one of the things that we can do in translating that to how we manage our own money and how we make decisions about what's affordable and what's not in our own lifestyle is, I guess my suggestion is pick a baseline. So maybe you can look at, I'll explain the concept for steady times and then teach you how to adapt it for now, perhaps. So if you had the ability to sort of say, oh yeah, my income's stable, then what you would do is you'd say to your bookkeeper or your accountant in collaboration with you, you'd say, okay, what's the average that I can look at right now that would go through this? So you just draw a line of a baseline is what I would call it. So that is the base average, so monthly income or whatever cycle you work on. Monthly is probably pretty good. Fortnightly even might help from a personal perspective. But look at what the average baseline is of the income that you could earn. Now, right now, that baseline may actually be lower. So this might be a conversation of being ultra conservative about the next 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months for you, and saying, if I was ultra conservative, what would be probably the lowest amount that I could expect to earn over the next 12 months? And base a lot of your personal financial decisions off of that baseline. So let's call that a base. So if you think of that as your base, the way to structure the uncertainty then is to pay yourself a steady wage based on the baseline. So treat yourself like an employee is the way to go about it. Now, I know a lot of bookkeepers and accountants also talk about that. I wholeheartedly agree with them. It is really good because it takes some of the stress out of your mind around managing your personal finances because you're just treating yourself like an employee. So how you come up with that baseline is through looking with your bookkeeper and the business income, but look at your baseline income and pay yourself a steady wage. So fortnightly pay cycle works really, really good in that sense. So pay yourself that steady wage and start building your personal budget off of that baseline income. So how much you can afford week to week off of that. Now, let's say that, well, you know, the way I've illustrated, I've drawn the base for the podcast listeners, I've drawn the base quite low at this period of time because we have a lot of uncertainty about what the income will be. Fingers crossed for many people, the actual income is a lot higher than that. So what you want to do is then have the average income that you might pay. I said pay, I mean earn. The income that you do actually earn, perhaps, and let's hope that it's a lot higher than the base. Consider that your bonus. So in a way, think of yourself, instead of being self-employed, but being a lot like a person who is an employee in a sales role in that way. So they're often paid a base salary, and then based on quarterly or half yearly or annual statistics, they're paid a bonus. So treat yourself in a very similar way in that sense. So consider yourself as earning a base plus a bonus, with a base based on a low estimate based on in today's economic climate. And then once a quarter, maybe in consultation with your bookkeeper, look back and say, hey, here's what I earned. And what can I get paid from that? Maybe do it once a quarter, once a 6 months, once a year, up for you. So is this making sense? Is this useful? Can you just give me a nod or a yep? Yeah, okay. If it's not, feel free to throw in the chat box. What would it be most used? So this is one of the things that takes away that stress around uncertainty, is actually to smooth out the variability in your personal life. I know we can't, smooth it out in our income side. So build your budget off of the base income. And then what you do with the bonus is you put that towards long-term goals. So you might have things that you need to, like a holiday in 12 months time that you'd like to take, for example. You might be building towards a renovation on your house. You might be building towards wealth creation, for example, for investment. What starts, rather than the traditional approach, if you read many of the personal finance books that are often aimed at employees, is around, well, steadily put some money aside every pay for your long-term wealth creation or for your long-term goals. That's just not really possible when you've got a variable income. So instead, set those compartments up, those buckets, as Scott Pape, the Barefoot Investor, talks them about, but top them up infrequently with your bonus in that sense. So treat yourself like it's a base plus a bonus. How you do this is, I recommend, if you haven't already got it in your small business, and each business might be structured a little bit differently, but I recommend setting up a hub account that acts like a reservoir. So have all the income coming into there, sort of accumulating up and down like a reservoir does, and then pay yourself the steady wage from that reservoir account. Now, sometimes you might need that, your business might not be structured that way, so set the hub up account in your personal situation first, so all your business income goes like that. So that could be whether so if you're a sole trader, for example, that you might be slightly different to someone who's set up as a trust or a corporate in that sense. But the principle is you facilitate the steady wage that you're paying yourself through using a hub or a reservoir account that accumulates all the money going in and slowly builds up money in those good months, and then pays that steady wage out of it. So is that useful so far? Does that make sense? Would you like any clarification of that? If you want some clarification, there's enough of us. Just whack your hand up, and maybe John can unmute yourself, or I'll go on. Yep, cool, excellent. So one of the other big challenges that everybody experiences, whether you're self-employed or not, that I come across from my client experience, is that we don't really know whether something is affordable or not. Let me illustrate that with an analogy. I have never been to a buffet and not overeaten. There is just too much abundant temptation out there. If I go into a buffet, it's food, I like food, I know it's tasty, I've had it before, I love it. It's so easy to pile food onto my plate and into my mouth, and then I have to have the stretchy pants on, undo a buckle, and in that sense. It is just too tempting to not overeat. And it's very hard to really get a sense of how much I should put in there. And even if I did have a sense of how much I should be putting on my plate, it's just totally overridden by the temptation. Every single day, we are immersed in a spending buffet. We are absolutely inundated with marketing messages on our phones, coming into our email, when we walk outside of the house, inundated with stuff in this consumerist world telling us to buy, or opportunities to spend our money. And on top of that, we've got friends and family, for example, flicking us ideas of, do you want to come out for dinner here? Do you want to go to this particular concert? Would you like to come to the cinema when it opens? All those sort of opportunities. So they're all tempting opportunities that we know that we enjoy. So the real challenge that we have is knowing, hey, is this opportunity affordable or not? And if all of our money is sloshing around in one big bank account, plus we've got access to credit, we don't actually know whether it's affordable or not. So our brains create a bit of a proxy and just go, oh, there's money there, or I've got access to the credit, or worse, buy now, pay later. And so we go, yeah, money's there, I'll do it. So that's a real challenge that we need to overcome. The other challenge is and I think the stress that I've experienced for a lot of people is knowing that there's going to be enough money for the bills coming in. So you know you've got bills coming in. We've got we've got an insurance broker here, but if you've got insurance premiums coming in, you've got to have making sure that you've got money to pay your insurance premiums, whether you're on the personal side or the business side. In that sense, you've got car registration that's going to come in. We're about to hit July, so probably people have got council rates coming in as well, even money for the regular rent coming in. So one of the real stresses is making sure you've got that covered. So what I recommend is that from that base wage that I was talking about before, so this is a way to handle both the abundant temptation that we're facing, but also cover the commitments. Compartmentalizing your accounts is one of the most important techniques for managing your personal money and also for managing your business money as well. So the tip I'm about to share, I know, also works within a small business as well. You can duplicate the system. I haven't got time to go into the full system today, but the compartmentalizing is something that our grandparents have been using. In fact, generations before us have been using. To manage their money, our grandparents used to use envelopes and jam jars and biscuit tins, for example. Grandpa perhaps, in those days, grandma wasn't allowed to work or didn't work. So grandpa would hand over his paycheck with all the cash in it, and grandma would eat all the envelopes and the jam jars and put it out for the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and away we would go. That's how they would know whether the essentials were absolutely covered. Scott Pape, the Barefoot Investor, calls this bucketing, but he certainly didn't invent the approach. Compartmentalization has been done for generations. So I recommend that in today's day and age, we do that. And the way we set up our compartments helps us to make sure that we've got money set aside. So I recommend from that base wage, work out all of your commitments and cover your commitments. So that will take away some of the stress of knowing that the things that you've already committed to pay, which includes things like your essentials and anything else that you've already said yes to. If like, for example, I know that I've got a physio appointment this week. I said yes to that appointment 8 weeks ago. So 8 weeks ago, I made a commitment to go to the physio, and that it would cost me a certain amount of money. So that is a commitment at that point in time. I have the opportunity then to plan for the predictable amount that over $100 is going to be required out of my account this Thursday, and start putting money aside to that. So even a commitment like that counts as covering your commitments. So take your base wage, have a look through everything that you've committed to spend. So go through your regular spending, go through all your insurances and other amounts, work out what that amount is per year, divided by the pay cycle you've chosen to use, whether it be weekly or fortnightly or monthly. Comes in, an automatic transfer goes over to that commitment account. That way, you've covered your commitments, and you don't have to stress that there will be money there for those bills. So you don't have to then be tempted when the bill comes in to whack on the credit card in that sense. Because what can happen is if it's an important bill or an essential, like one of my clients was living pay to pay, she said, oh, well, I end up having to put the groceries on the credit card. I can't cancel my credit card because then I couldn't afford the groceries. The reality was the reason there wasn't enough money for the groceries and had to go on the credit card is because she was blowing too much money on indulgences that weren't planned for. And it's not just her, it's all of us in that sense. So the alternate way is to cover those commitments in a separate account. And then if you've got that temptation that I was talking about before, the abundant temptation, where you've got, you're presented with an opportunity to buy something, then you've got a better reference point. If there's money left over in my account after I've allocated to cover my commitments, I've got a better reference point for if there's money there for that or not, which is much easier way to resist the abundant temptation that we are all faced with in that sense. So that incorporates another tip for resisting for abundant temptation is to restrict access to money. So you're restricting access to money by using compartments. And ultimately, you want to get to the point where you've got the flow through so you can cancel access to credit, you can cancel your buy now, pay later accounts, because they are just enablers of our moments of low willpower, which we all have, because willpower is fickle and unreliable. So having extra access to money that is not money that you have earned and saved is actually an enabler of those weak moments that we've all got. So ultimately, if you can restrict, you can work up to restricting that access. So pay yourself a steady wage, set up a separate compartment for your commitments and automatically cover those commitments, and then restrict yourself to just spending what's left over for those unplanned impulses and indulgent spending is one great starting point for setting up a budget that you can stick to. So I call it the stickable budget system. Many of us think that our inability to stick to a budget, in fact, this is a cultural thing. When I say many of us, it's a cultural thing. We're almost told that, well, our inability to stick to a budget, our inability to stick to an exercise plan, and inability to stick to a diet, you just need more willpower. Now that is absolutely BS according to behavioral science. So BS according to behavioral science. So it's not the case. Willpower is renowned to be fickle and unreliable. It's not more willpower you need. It's not a character flaw. It's actually a design flaw in the systems that we're using to navigate that environment where there is abundant temptation. So the solution is not to try to get more willpower, which is almost doomed to fail. The solution is to design a better system for knowing that the environment is full of abundant temptation, and we are human in that sense. So two of those elements of designing the better system are pay yourself a steady wage, compartmentalize, and cover your commitments in that particular way. Just reading that comment, regimentation. Troy, can you unmute yourself and expand on that, please? If you're able to, or type it in the chat box.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, mate.
Yeah. I just guess you have to set yourself regimented deadlines, so you make sure you do daily, weekly, monthly, so that you cover all those expenses, so that you don't spend unnecessarily, that sort of thing. Just a bit of regimented routine moving forward. That's what I've found. Got
it. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying, Troy. Regimentation, with using the synonym of routine. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that behavioral science talks about, this is behavioral scientists like B.J. Fogg, Stanford professor from Behavior Design Labs, James Clear with his 2 million best-selling book called Atomic Habits. They talk about one-time behaviors as being one-time behaviors that you do that take a little bit of work, but actually enable you to make doing the right thing and the right choices really important. So setting up a routine where you're automatically transferring money to cover your commitments, that's a one-time behavior. You just do that it's mostly a one-time behavior. You just do that calculation once of all the things that you have come out every single year, or at least once every single year that you're committed to. Do that calculation once, divide it by your pay cycle. That's a one-off action. Setting up the automatic transfer, another one-off action. Setting up the separate bank account, a one-off action. And that automates your routine in that sense. So it's not even a level of discipline that you're relying on to do the regimentation. You're just relying on the automation that you've already built in. So it's automation through one-time behaviors make doing the right thing automatic. So it's easy to do the right thing, and overspending, if we define that as the wrong thing, so spending money that we don't have, that is the harder to do. So make it, so James Clear's third law of creating and breaking habits is make the right behavior easy, and the behavior you want to break, make that hard to do. So the regimentation of routine that Troy's talked about, that's one way to make it actually happen automatically, so that you don't have to think about it. It doesn't take any energy, it just happens in that sense. So look, there's so much more I could talk about how to design a really great budgeting system. I've written a mini guide about it called How to Stick to a Budget, which is really around how to design a stickable budget. That's probably a better title that I'd come up with. So you can get that complimentary on my website when you subscribe to my newsletter. So that includes 7 elements in it. Actually, I think I've got 10 in there. 10 in there of designing the system of a stickable budget that we can go into. So I want to pause right now because we've gone for about a half an hour, John. If anyone's got any questions that they just want to unmute themselves potentially, or just ask them in the box, let's go ahead. Or anything I haven't covered, for example, that's burning to you, let's go into that. Or John, you want to wrap up and stick to the time?
No, that's all right. I think sticking to a budget is the most difficult thing. And that's where maybe I've got a wife who helps me stick to a budget.
Yeah.
And does the calculations. So having that sort of additional person keeping you accountable, it's a bit like business coaching and mentoring. A lot of the value comes out of just being kept accountable.
Exactly, like accountability. And I think, John, you're quite familiar with James Clear's Atomic Habits. So I remember we were speaking about it months ago now. So his 4th law talks about, so the behavior gets repeated when we get a buzz out of it, when it feels good to do it. So how do we make doing the right thing feel good and the wrong thing feel bad? Well, accountability is one of those real key elements. So that's one of the elements of creating a stickable budget, is how do you build accountability into it? Having an accountability partner who's also your life partner, where you've got joint finances, can work really, really well if you're on the same page with the system. Sometimes a third-party accountability person can help you both get on to the same page. And that's what I really do as a money coach, is I help couples come together who are struggling with money, come together, create a system they agree on that's saving towards and spending on what matters most to them in that sense. And then ultimately they become self-sufficient in that accountability and hold each other accountable. So that's absolutely a step there. And I'll throw one more in there while I'm riffing, if that's all right, John, from that the 4th law of making it feel good, is the other part, and this comes from the Stanford professor B.J. Fogg in his book Tiny Habits, where it's around, I call it celebrate every good financial decision. So when we overspend and we buy something, it feels good, so we get a dopamine spike in our head, but our brain can't really tell whether we've bought something or not and made a great financial decision. So what you could do is you hack your brain science in that sense, and every time you make a great financial decision, B.J. Fogg recommends that you celebrate every time you make a good decision and do the habit that you want. So I call that celebrate a great financial decision. And I don't mean go out and buy something to celebrate. I mean find a nut, because that would be counter to the outcome that you're trying to get to. What I mean is actually just hack your brain and create the dopamine spike. And that can come simply by smiling. Smiling triggers a similar response in your brain. Often I'll sit there and go, yes, Matt, to myself. Yeah, sometimes in public it's a little bit embarrassing, but give yourself a high five, just go, yes, just something that triggers that. So enough to that making the right decision gets a good dopamine hit in your brain, which then creates a great neural pathway, so you're more likely to make a good financial decision again. So that's almost a part of self. That's how you keep yourself accountable, by celebrating every great financial decision, which is another part of developing a stickable budget. But because that's the last step in the process, it's also the least reliable, which is why tracking your spending is not a reliable method for cutting your spending. Just like tracking where you eat, what you spend, tracking what you eat isn't necessarily reliable because it doesn't help you in the heat of the moment when you're faced with temptation. So it is a useful secondary tool, but not a primary tool, because you need a tool that helps you in the heat of the moment. And that's where using compartments and restricting access is a much more reliable method, because it helps you in the heat of the moment make a good decision, which you can then celebrate. So that's just another one thrown in there. There's probably 3 or 4 others I could throw in, but it might take a little bit longer.
That's all right. Let's wrap up, Matt, and then if people want to stay on and ask you some questions, and that they can. How can people get in contact with you?
Best way to get in touch with me is via my website, matthern.com.au, which is MATTHERN. That's N for November. matthern.com.au is the best way. Then you can find the links to my social channels to follow me if you want to there. And on my website, as I mentioned, I've got that weekly newsletter that I send out with insights in it, and you get the mini guide how to stick to a budget when you subscribe to that.
All right, fantastic. And from my point of view, if anybody wants to get in contact with me or find out more about my mentoring groups and workshops that I run, then it's johndenton.com.au. There's a pattern here, Matt, with the website.
There is.
So johndenton.com.au. There'll be another Lunch and Learn in a couple of weeks' time, so look out for that. And there was something else I was going to mention. Oh, yes. For those who are watching this on YouTube, then for those who are watching this on YouTube, then there will be a couple of suggestions of other Lunch and Learn videos that you can watch as well, which will come up just shortly as we close. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will open it up for any other questions.